of the examination process, and please treat it as an exam, because this panel of 10 people is going to assess whether you actually qualify or you do not qualify to receive the award of Makerere University. So that is about the process as we do it in Makerere. It's a public defense, so the whole public is invited. There are those who will be online to actually be convinced that Nestor did the work. So in terms of managing the time, we are going to give you not more than an hour to share with us your work. Then after that, we shall have the opponent who will be duly introduced, although you can know from here that she's Dr. Charlotte Mafumbo. And after you engage with the opponent, you'll go ahead to engage with the examiners. After you engage with the examiners, you'll go ahead to engage with the public. Any member of the public is free to interrogate you on this work. It's not only for gender experts. That's why we have a public oral defense. So that's how we are going to run. We expect not to be here longer than 2-3 hours, but you'll give us the pace. So Nestor, I think my journey stops here. I wish you a fruitful deliberations from here up to when we finish here. Thank you very much. Best wishes. Thank you, Professor. Maybe just to say the person coming in is Dr. Sarah Bimbona. I think the others are from the school, you may know them, but she's coming from the school, College of Business. So we are going to talk entrepreneurship. Those are the gurus of entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sarah. Stand on the existing protocol for...
Thank you, Professor Sarah Saleh. I stand on the existing protocol to welcome you all and greet you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. My study examined micro-entrepreneurship and how they empower women in Kampala Central Division. Okay. Is this okay? Okay. Oh, it is okay here. Okay. I welcome you all and I greet you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. My study examined micro-entrepreneurship and empowerment of women in Kampala Division. I was supervised by Dr. Henry Manyire and Professor Omolo Fredrick Okalebo. This is the structure of my presentation. I'll start with the definition of concepts, the study background. I'll conclude with the recommendations. Now, this study looks at agency, according to Kabir's definition, 2017, as the ability to engage in meaningful actions. A micro-enterprise, on the other hand, is defined by World Bank 2021 as a firm that employs less than 10 people. This study, however, looks at micro-enterprises that employed less than 3 people and with a business capital that did not exceed 200,000 Uganda shillings or US dollars 52. Empowerment in this study is defined as a process of challenging existing power relations and gaining control over sources of power. The urban space, on the other hand, is a physical area with all characteristics such as roads, buildings, markets, green belts, mention it, all those that can perform activities for the similar environment. Now, talking about micro-enterprises, these are some examples of micro-enterprises. Women with very limited capital. You know, the items vary from green leafy vegetables, tomatoes, we have mangoes, the other side, and a few others. Here are some other micro enterprises. There's a lady here selling small diapers, another young girl here, and another one selling for the mother. These are some of the employees that I'm talking about. Here is the study area, Central Division, and surrounded by other divisions, Kawempe, Nakawa, Machinde, and Rubaga. Study background. Micro-entrepreneurship are globally a backbone of many countries' economies, such as America, Russia, Mexico, to mention but a few. That is according to UNDP 2022. Now, the males dominated the urban spaces until the 20th century, when the women emerged and they occupy the public spaces, including the urban spaces. Why? Because of the agglomeration of many opportunities, which include, not limited to, job opportunities, including micro-enterprises. Now, micro-enterprises provide employment, they generate income, they also have the potential to empower women. That is according to UNDP 2022. And this is re-echoed by international as well as national frameworks such as Sustainable Development Goal, which aims at achieving equality, Sustainable Goal 5, and Sustainable Development Goal 10, which aims at reduced inequalities. Together, there is also Vision 2040 and National Development Plan 3, which prioritize the empowerment of women and as well as gender equality. This is according to Republic of Uganda Report 2021. Now, in Africa, the continent is leading the entire world in percentages of micro-enterprises. And of these, 42% are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. However, there are more male micro-enterprises than female, according to UNDP 2019. And in Uganda, approximately 52% of the working population are operating micro-enterprises. These are composed of 50 males and 48 females, more or less the same percentages. Now, most micro-enterprises are not registered. Why? Because they operate, quite a good number of micro-enterprises operate in very anachronistic circumstances. Some of them operated in people's homes, in streets. They walk from one place to another. The spaces are not certain. Now, the problem statement. Micro-entrepreneurship provides employment, it generates income, and also has the potential to improve women's lives, including empowering the women. The literature has said. Now, despite the women's involvement in micro-enterprises in different places, in some very unprecedented circumstances, some of them formal, others not informal, they are impeded by a number of factors, including but not limited to limited access to resources. Resources include lack of finances, skills, as well as the actual space for operation. Now, the micro, small, and medium enterprises policy 2015-2025 is very silent about the operation of micro enterprises, particularly the ones that you have seen in the photos. There are enormous knowledge gaps that exist in the literature. For example, how do poor women, as those that you have seen, access the highly guarded patriarchal urban spaces? How do they negotiate their way into the urban spaces such as Kampala? How do the women use spaces? What about the relationship between the urban spaces and the women's agency, the decision-making patterns, the women's work life? I'm talking about the productive and reproductive roles. How do women in such urban spaces operating micro-enterprises, how do they balance the two? And we know over the years, KCCA officials who are predominantly male have been guarding the streets. They are throwing women in jail. They're confiscating their property. So it is really not clear. Therefore, this study investigated how micro-entrepreneurship empowered women within the urban spaces of Kampala Central Division. Now, the general objective was to investigate how micro-entrepreneurship influenced women's empowerment in the spaces of Kampala. The specific objectives of the study were: one, to establish how women entrepreneurs, access, negotiated, and use the urban spaces in Kampala Central Division. The study also established urban opportunities that promoted women micro enterprises, and also the study set out to investigate the barriers that hindered women's micro enterprises, both in starting as well as growing micro businesses. Now, this study contributes to the existing knowledge on how women micro entrepreneurs negotiated the urban spaces for survival. It also provides insights into the social institutional environments that enable women to access and use urban spaces. Similarly, this study provides a foundation for recommendations for future research, policy on urban micro-entrepreneurship, as well as women's empowerment. Lastly, the study enhances an understanding of the role of micro-enterprises in shaping and promoting the women's empowerment. This study was grounded on two theoretical frameworks: empowerment framework by Sarah Longwe, as well as Kabir's model of empowerment, and Lefebvre's spatial triad model of space theory. Now, Sarah's model aims to achieve control over factors of production. And she uses 5 parameters that can be used to test empowerment in institutions and as well as individuals. Now, these levels are hierarchical in nature, with control on top and welfare rate at the bottom, the rest being participation, conscientization, and access. Now, Kabir's empowerment is about change, and for change to take place, people must have choices. The choices must be supported by resources, agency, and achievement. Now, on the other hand, Lefebvre's triad model of space theory is about how people, but in this case, women create spaces. Now these spaces are a milieu for activities to be cushioned. Now, Lefebvre emphasizes a triad model of space, as we can see. There is, the pointer is not working, okay? This is the triad model of space. Okay, oh, thank you, doctor. Oh, okay, should have known. Okay, these are the dimensions that Lefebvre is trying to talk about. There is the perceived space, there's discourse on space, the discourse of space. Now, the lacuna in this space, in this case, the missing link of the jigsaw puzzle is what this study intends to find out. So at the end of the study, I should be able to tell you how the women carve their space amidst this triad model of space by Lefebvre 1994. Methodology. This study used a parallel mixed design or convergent design, which included getting information, gathering data, both quantitative and qualitative at the same time, but again, analyzing it at different times. Now, differently. I used a mixed methods design, methods approach with both qualitative and quantitative methodology. The data was obtained from 140 women in Nakivubo Muse, Kafumbe Mukasa, Usafi Market, and Market Street. All these areas in Kampala Central Division. Why Kampala was chosen? Because it's the country's capital city. It generates more than 60% of the national GDP. It is an interesting place for a study. Now, these women the 140 women in these places. At the time of the study, the information I got from the key informant, such as the leaders and the KC officials, these areas had very many micro-entrepreneurs from which a sample was got. So I used the 140 and I got the 140 using the simple random sampling as well as snowball sampling. Now, snowball sampling helped me to get the women that were operating in streets that were highly guarded by KCCA. Now, the information that I obtained from the women was the experiences of women regarding their access, regarding their usage, regarding the negotiation of the same women in the urban spaces. Similarly, I obtained information from KCC officials. These are key informants. KCC officials, these were the four local council leaders, the 4 women leaders, and I got them using purposive sampling. These people had expert information regarding the women's access, the women's negotiation, and the experiences about how the women were using the urban space in Kampala Central Division. So in total, I had 12 key informers and 6 cases. The cases were the women who had stayed in those particular places, operating micro businesses for quite some time. And I was guided by the local council leaders to how to get these very women, because they knew those that had stayed in those particular places for quite some time. So they had a lot of experience regarding the women. Data was collected using a survey, and the tool here was a questionnaire. That is quantitative data. Qualitative data, on the other hand, was obtained using interview method. And the tool that I used was Key Informant Interview Guide, the Primary Case Study Interview Guide. I also used an observation method, and the tool that I used for observation was an observation guide. As you have seen, I also used the photography method. After collecting data, I cleaned it. And for quantitative data analysis, I used the statistical package for social sciences, SPSS, with a number of statistical methods such as univariate, bivariate, multivariate. For data presentation, I used tables, charts, and graphs. I analyzed qualitative data used in themes, and I presented it using verbative quotations as well as discussions. The study took into the standard ethical considerations, for example, of obtaining permission from the school. I also obtained clearance from National Council for Science and Higher Education, as well as permission from KCCA office. I also had to seek consent from the women. I explained to them how the study was an academic study, and it did not have any other ill intentions. And the women, I assured them that I was going to protect their names. Indeed, I used pseudonyms as I was presenting the information, the data. And I also assured them that they were at will to either continue or withdraw in case they were not sure, they were not comfortable with the interviews. The findings were presented according to the study objectives and study questions. The question in this case was, how do the women access, negotiate, and use the urban spaces? How? Now, it emerged from the findings that 62% of the respondents found securing space quite challenging due to KCCA law enforcement officers. 24% of respondents reported easy access to space, while 12% of respondents were undecided. Many micro entrepreneurs were helped by relatives and friends and in-laws. Now, when the women came to Kampala, How they obtained the space, they had a standpoint. They started from relatives, and many of them even followed, peers. Others followed, friends. Now, when they came, the relatives, the friends, and peers provided accommodation, food, and water. Now, in the meantime, they helped them to obtain small jobs such as working as apprentices in garages. Others were working in saloons. Others were working, as housemaids. And others were just appearing on the street to call out customers to potential, to people who already had established small businesses. And that is how they earn the money that they use to access the street. But before that, they also joined saving groups, which helped them to save quite a hectare an amount for them to be able to obtain startup capital. And once the capital was obtained, they hit the road. Still on objective number 1, how the women accessed and negotiated, and also use the urban spaces. As you have seen in the photos, the women used road pavements. Some of them negotiated with shop owners so they could be allowed to work from the verandas of their big shops, while others bribed the security personnel who were guarding those places, gave them some little money, and they were allowed to operate just in very, very archaic, situations. The young ones in particular would shift from one place to another, all in pursuit of buyers. It was very common to see a woman buying items from Nakasero market down straight, Akivubo, wherever. And yes, they start just like that, looking for customers wherever they were. Now, it was common in the morning to find a good number of them concentrated in lower parts of the central division. But in the evening, as people vacated the urban Kampala city, the central business, it was very possible for them to be seen following the routes of those who were living. No wonder they placed items along the pathways, and they were moving from one taxi to another, from one vehicle to another, and that is how they worked. With time, a good number of them obtained credit. Yes, they obtained goods on credit. That is an established kind of networking that the women were able to get as a result of accessing. Now, these are some of the insights which show that the micro-entrepreneurs started from a very marginal space, but along the way, they are beginning to get establishments. They are getting, connections. They can as well obtain goods on credit. That is a part of the back of the women micro enterprises. Now, women worked for other. There are those who worked for other micro enterprises. Micro entrepreneurs. Those that do not have capital found it easy, I must say, to sell goods on behalf of those other micro entrepreneurs who had some kind of, a little capital, I must say. And as you have seen in the study up in the photo, some young girls worked for their mothers and relatives just like that. Now, objective number 2, the urban opportunities that promoted women's microenterprises included the following. The study discovered that Kampala Central Division is a collection hub of a range of products and items. 60% of the respondents sold a single commodity, such as fruits, seen mangoes, guavas, to mention but those. Others were selling green leafy vegetables. Others were selling simple clothing such as sneakers, brassiers, socks, to mention by those, but a few. 8% sold 3 commodities. The study also found out that 70% of those women did not pay authorization fees, while 30% paid authorization fees. Now, those that paid authorization fees were particularly elderly women who preferred, who could not move from one place to another. And those who did not pay, they did not require places who could settle their items in one position. Now, the fact that they were able, I beg your pardon, the women were also able to obtain goods on credit. All these are urban opportunities. No wonder the women kept in the urban spaces. Much as KCC officials were chasing them here, and they kept going back. Why? Because the opportunities there are really quite a number. Lastly, what are the objective number 3? Aimed to find out the barriers for women micro enterprises and how these barriers affected them both in operating and navigating the urban spaces. From the findings, 29% of the women complained about high-handedness of the KCCA enforcement officers. 19% on the other hand reported limited operational capital, while 14% reported few customers. 9% of the respondents lacked space due to high rent. The core roles, the productive and reproductive cleaning, the washing, the child feeding, cooking, they tended to compete with entrepreneurial pursuits. Now, these are some of the interesting verbatims. One from the 43-year-old entrepreneur. This is what she says. Business nowadays is stunted because of KCC officials. Sometimes they confiscate all our trade items. Another one by a KCC official says, we have the power mandated to us by the law. It is that power that should make the vendors subservient when they are arrested, not for the vendors to attack and then come and play victim. Despite this intervention by KCCA, acts and, the women had coping mechanisms, surprisingly. One, some they had their own small saving groups. They call them monomukabi. In Rutoro, you say owawe mukabi. So these groups help them in one or the other, particularly when they got problems with KCC officials. This one woman who said when she was arrested, was taken to Nakawa, the monomukabi came and bailed her out. And several, anecdotes like that. There was also bravery as a way of navigating the spaces and using the spaces. There are others who prefer to work at night. They hit the street at night when the KCC officials were not there. Similarly, the women were walking from one place to another. And that's how they made their money. From one street, from one corner, from one veranda to another. 73% were able to persevere. There are those who said, yeah, it is a do or die. This is the street, I will die here, because that is how I obtain money to take care of myself, as well as pay school fees for my children. So this act of resilience is an attribute that was socially ascribed to men. But because the women are coming into the urban spaces, more so the Kampala city, they are learning to behave, more or less. That strength to overcome KCCA officials and their acts is really an act of empowerment. 73%, the women, because they couldn't, some of them found it very hard to balance the care roles with the work in the urban spaces. They chose to come with the children. They worked with the children. Others even, employed their women, the children, as you have seen in the photo, to sell, as they also sold some other items. There was also, yes, I've mentioned selling at night. Now, basing from the general objective, which was to investigate how urban spaces and micro enterprises empower women in Kampala Central, these are the performance indicators. Number one, the fact that women are able to access the highly guarded KCC officials, KCCA, the highly guarded space by KCCA, who are predominantly male, is an act of conscientization, participation, and control. They are able to navigate and use the urban spaces. The saving groups, where they acquire skills such as financial literacy, the problem solving, the time management, the leadership skills in those groups. The groups have their own structures. There's a chairperson, there's a secretary, there's, these are, they are modes of empowerment, of political empowerment, which exist in the urban spaces. Now, there also the fact that the women were able to, they were resilient to gender stereotypes. The women are not supposed to come. Traditionally, they're not supposed to be in the cities. They're supposed to keep in the backyard, in the kitchen. But here they are. And from time to time, I'm sure some of us, but I have been downtown. The males think the spaces belong to them. I have had very, very nasty situations where males have a tendency, some of them want to pull you, and they think you're there for nothing else but, and when you resist, they say, Malaya baganyi ojigula. There are others who pull you to buy their stuff, but when you refuse, they throw very hard words, all, sorts of discrimination. And at one time, there's a man who pulled me and said, can you work for 500? I mean, 5,000 or a ton or so, something like that. Uganda, forgive me, my Uganda is not very good. Now, the fact that the women are able to take on men's responsibilities of taking care of their homes, they're taking care of their welfare, food, their clothing, these are all acts of empowerment that Kabir as well as Sarah Longway 2002 talks about. Those are hierarchical. There is one who said he was able to build a small house in a village in Kabera Maido. A woman building a house in Kabera Maido. A woman, that's the highest level of empowerment, which is welfare. And this has been able to be achieved because the women have accessed the urban spaces. There is also the ability to withstand men's acts of transgression. There are women who alluded that had chosen to stay in a very abusive relationship because she felt she could take care of her children, she could provide much, just as the man was providing, food for the home. There were also women who said, no, I can't stand this abusively. They chose to go. These are, acts of decision making. The fact that they activate their agency, they can decide, they can, choose when, how, and when to do it. These are acts of, empowerment as a result of women engaging in the urban spaces, more so in micro-entrepreneurship. Recommendations. This study recommends that a study to investigate the impact of saving groups on the empowerment of women, micro-enterprise in Kampala, be conducted. I also recommend that another study is done to investigate how available urban opportunities are promoting the growth of women microenterprises in Kampala. Likewise, I recommend that a similar study in a different urban setting with less urban restrictions for comparative purposes be conducted. Okay. I also recommend that a study to establish how urban microenterprises can exist in Kampala amidst the existing regulations be conducted. And lastly, I recommend that a study that addresses the women's access to urban spaces on household gender. The time was not enough, and the scope would not allow me to look at some of these outliers. That's the reason I recommend a study for those other, nuances. Number 2, recommendations. Now, to women micro-enterprises, I recommend that the formalization of their enterprises be done. This is one way where they will obtain, support from government initiatives such as PDM for funding. As you can see, the startup capital for many of them was really minimal. Many of them are just there for survival. They work from hand to mouth. That's all. To the policy makers, the study recommends that these women, throwing them away, you know, looking at them as being unsightly. No wonder World Bank looks at them, such people without capital, refers to them as urbanization of people without capital. But they are there. They matter. So I think it's important that some areas are zoned for purposes of micro-entrepreneurship. I also recommend that KCC officials really should be sensitized about the way the minimum force, the maximum force that they use for the women. It should be, you know, minimum. Also establish, I recommend that a channel for micro enterprises. Feedback and concerns are established. They are there, but no one listens to them. They don't have, there's nowhere they report. They are on their own. It's a do or die, you know. I also recommend to the policymakers that this group of very many millions of micro enterprises, entrepreneurs, especially the women who have, you know, a lot of, you know, responsibilities, taking care of their children, taking care of school fees, you know, they work a lot, but they earn little. But they should be equipped with skills such as cosmetology, hairdressing, baking, tailoring. And after the training, I recommend that the government could offer some equipment to help them to start tangible businesses. Lastly, it is of critical importance to expand the policy toolbox to cater for these poor women. No wonder the micro, small and medium enterprise policy is very quiet about these people that I'm talking about. So the question is, where are we going from there? Thank you very much for listening to me. May God bless you.
Thank you very much, Nestor. You've actually saved us a lot of time, and we really appreciate. Next, we are going to the stage of engaging with the opponent. Our opponent is Dr. Charlotte Karungi Mafumbo. Dr. Charlotte is the head of Department of History, but she's also an expert on women and peace building. She has just concluded the East African Community Design of the Regional Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. She's the one who has read your work in greater detail, and this stage is a very, very important stage, maybe even more important than the previous presentation we have had. So we are going to accord it a little bit more time, using even the time you have helped us to save. So over to you, Dr. Charlotte. I don't know whether you're going to come here. Yes. So one stands here and another one stands there, and we see how we proceed.
The Dean of Women Gender Studies, Professor Josephine Manyire, all colleagues in your different capacities, all other students who are here also, who are learning from you. You're now an example this morning. And to our dear Nestor, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think that one thing that stands out so clearly, that you write about a group of women who we all see, admire, like, and love, but we never write about them. It's so interesting, and I was sharing this morning that around the 19th, I can't recall the exact date, there'll be someone presenting on exactly something similar. And so my biggest interest in your work starts with trying to understand, why is there this interest now about this category of women? Because why is it that we're seeing a lot of work being done? And I'm referencing that other defense that is coming up. What is in it for them when you study them? So in this work that you have done, I think it's a very rewarding piece. And your work on women and how they're empowered is dependent on so many resources that you have used. And it comes at a time when the government of Uganda has established deliberate initiatives such as affirmative action, your microfinance support that you've mentioned, and financial handouts that target them. Women undertaking micro-business have one overall goal, and that's finding a basic means of livelihood and survival in this very precarious economic situation, as you rightly observe. So your decision to write on them, these so-called underprivileged women in the heart of the capital, is very, very crucial. It provides a better understanding of them and provides a broader perspective on their role in surviving. I was only cheated when I didn't hear the magical words that start with women empowerment. I don't hear you acknowledge the Women in Development Framework, the Women and Development Framework, because these are really at the center of why these women are becoming very critical. So from the onset, you argue that the World Bank attributes, read blame, the growth of micro-entrepreneurs to the urbanization of people without capital. You also argue that the rapid growth of the micro-entrepreneurs was a result of the low operating costs these businesses need, their flexibility to allow women to undertake more than 1 gig, these are the words they use today, at a time, and how the barriers to these kinds of businesses are very easy to surmount. In essence, the women are responsible for the situation they are in, correct? So where do you place the role of the state? To what extent should this duty bearer, the state, take responsibility for this situation these women are in?
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate your very insightful question. I also acknowledge that I did not actually think about the women in development. These are very fundamental, aspects that need to be incorporated in my study. But going forward, I'm going to address that as soon as possible. Now, as regards the role of the state, it is very imperative, as I have also noted, that the women are helped to formalize their businesses. That is the starting point. Then the next point is to register them, and then allocate some resources, particularly for this very marginalized but very important group of people in this country.
So that goes back to where we started, that women are critical and the state has to play a critical role. But I also love that you referenced the World Bank. And I'm very happy to have Professor Sarah Saleh here, who is a neoliberal scholar. I think she would argue that the World Bank is the reason we have all these problems. The structure adjustment programs are the reason these women are where they are. And again, I think that is something that I would have loved to see you engage with, because their policies, privatization, liberalization, opening up the spaces, reduced the opportunity that these women would have. The withdrawal of resources from education, from health, accounts for the regional disparities, which are the source of these women that we are starting with. So in a way, I would love to see you apportion blame. Don't look at these women as the reason they are there, because it's not by accident. There are structural causes that are responsible for this situation.
Thank you, Doctor.
And I'm glad that you make that effort. Let's talk about in your book. I like the definition of key concepts. But
Thank you,
again,
Doctor.
I realized that the ones that you relate with most in your presentation are left out. You have your micro enterprise, but nowhere do I see a definition of micro entrepreneurship, of micro business, and yet they're the focus. So sometimes the definition gives us the opportunity to appreciate the magnitude of the issue that you are studying. I would like you to turn to your objectives. I think they are on page. Page 9. Oh, you actually have them there. I want you to persuade me that there is a difference between objective 1 and objective 3.
Thank you, Doctor. Objective number 1 and objective number 3. 1 looks at the barriers that hinder women in accessing as well as operating in Kampala Central Division. And the other one also looks at how they negotiate and use the urban spaces in Kampala. The difference between the two is one is looking at a problem, while the other one is looking at the narrative, the story about the negotiation, the use, and the access. Thank you, Doctor.
So investigating barriers that hinder women's micro enterprise does not include negotiating use of space?
It does, but the objective number 1 critically concentrates on the barriers, and yet number 3 looks at the barriers in a critical way. But objective number 1 is broad, and it encompasses a number of things, including but not limited to access, negotiation, and usage of urban spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a very thin line between the two that I would have loved you to pay attention to. From the onset again, you give us a detailed breakdown of the difference between a micro business, a micro entrepreneur, and a small and medium enterprise. So I would have requested at that point that we very clearly delineate the difference between the three. Throughout the thesis, you use them interchangeably. And yet, I think that if you look at the typologies and definitions of the three, there is a slight difference that needed to be picked up.
Thank you, Doctor.
For example, the small businesses. The small businesses sound small, but they're actually bigger than the micro entrepreneurs. So that would be very nice to see you engage with this. In your work, chapter 2. I think that's the most interesting chapter, the theoretical framework. And I'm glad that you have those slides that we can always reference. I would like us to go to your theoretical framework. The first that I found very, perhaps I should say, innovative is that this thesis does not look like many other theses. Commonly, chapter 2 is literature review. Here it was theoretical framework. Chapter 3 then became the literature framework, the literature review. Chapter 4 became a whole chapter on the economic history of Uganda, focusing on the urban. And then chapter 5 was the methodology. What I'm normally used to is introduction, chapter, literature review, then methodology. Because for you, pushing it to chapter 5 means that there are certain aspects of the methodology that you've left out, which sometimes are incorporated from the literature review. But I think this is something that is unique, and we all do things differently, but I would love that you think about it. Now, with the theories that you have used, they are all very impressive, I must say. For example,
Thank you, Doctor.
Delongwe's empowerment theory and how she positions the role of empowerment at the two levels, the individuals, the collective levels. It speaks to the study.
Thank you, Doctor.
Similarly, when you think of the Lebrev spatial theory, which I think credits more the built economics, how the spaces are explained, that one as well is very critical in explaining the workspaces that you highlight, the streets, the back streets, and the informal sector. I don't know if you often watch, there are some of these comedy WhatsApps where there's someone called Sekajugo. And I think that would be a good analogy. Sekajugo is someone who is looking for a job, and he's asked, so where do you stay? He says, I keep changing my villages. Said, why do you change the villages? He says, well, I change the villages depending on where the business is. Sometimes he changes the villages where he operates from, depending on where the business is. So if the business is in Masaka, he goes to Masaka. Akuba long tour, and he goes to Masaka. So I like if you could use some of these analogies in your work to explain this spatial part, because the reason they're leaving the streets and going everywhere and hiding is already part of the negotiation you're talking about the barriers.
Sure.
And the third theory, which is the Kabir argumentation, they're all very good theories. But handling all the three at a go leaves me with one question. Which one then is the most appropriate in explaining your study? Because if each theory is explaining one part of the study, it becomes a challenge. Which would you think would combine?
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. To begin with, there are two theories, not three. Empowerment theory by Kabir, and Kabir's model highlights aspects which are more or less strengthened by Sarah Longwe. But Sarah Longwe does not bring out the act of agency which Kabir brings out. So the two theorists strengthen, the elements of the two theories kind of strengthen one another.
Is that something that you do? I think you should add it. Because throughout, I don't see you in the thesis as you conclude.
I will.
That you merge.
Because
often when you use a theory, you show its strengths and weaknesses, which you're telling us now, but we don't see it.
Yes, Doctor, thank you.
Work. In the next piece, your literature, I think that the one thing that is also very impressive, you read a wide range of literature and you reference it.
Thank you, Doctor.
What is empowerment? Because in your arguments and your literature, you seem to argue that empowerment is a bottom-up process of transferring gender power relations through which an individual or group develop awareness of women's subordination. So is it true that empowerment is a bottom-up project? Or
thank you, Doctor. Empowerment in this study was defined differently. And as I said, Sarah Longwe has her own way of looking at it. According to Longwe, she looks more of equal opportunities, access. She looks at the 5 hierarchical levels of empowerment. While Kabir, on the other hand, emphasizes the 3 aspects. So in this case, going by your question, empowerment, according to Sarah Longwe, is hierarchical in nature. But to Kabir, it is having the 3 elements, which include resources, agency, and achievement.
So in that case, if that is empowerment, you have challenges that women face, and you have the undercapitalization, you have the family obligations, you have lack of time to network. And for education, they lack managerial skills, they have absence of capacity building, they cause gender stereotypes, and a whole lot of them. And at this material time, I would have loved to know, out of this, depending on our choice of women that we have studied, is there any way we can create the same hierarchy of appreciation of these challenges? For example, from the onset, they're already marginalized, okay? They didn't have education, probably that's why they ended up where they did. So when in your challenges that women face on page 46, it would be very nice if you create a chronological arrangement of these factors so that you end up with the ones that reference women's issues, which are the reason they get into microfinance.
Thank you, Doctor. I will do that.
I'll go to our proposed revisions, which are in my report. But let's go to chapter 4. And this was my favorite chapter because as an historian, you drag me back to understand where it all started. The economic history of Uganda, focusing on the urban informal sector in general and micro-entrepreneurship in particular. This chapter is so critical because it provides an economic history of Uganda. But I wanted to know, is there any reason in this chapter why your analysis starts from 1972 and ends in 1986? Are there any specific reasons that you leave out 1962?
No, Doctor.
Okay, because as an historian, and I don't think at this point it's as important, but it would be nice for someone reading to see that you take us in 62, because the reasons we are all having these issues are the first 5-year development plan, the second 5-year development plan, and these happen between the 62 and the 72. So if it was typographical, that is something you can correct, but it would have been very important for us to see that you are cognizant of the fact that women's issues don't only start in 72. Related on the first section of the thesis, on page 1, it joins the capitalist approach in blaming the women for their situation and how the state's economic planning has led to their need for survival. And I think the flow is very clear on why women get into the situation they do.
Thank you, Doctor.
I like that you reference a couple of people. I see the absence, though, of authors like William Easterly, Jeffrey Sachs, and Esther Duflo. Those 3 are very important, particularly Jeffrey Sachs, because I would have expected your model and your recommendations to have even drawn from the Millennium Development Goals. If you recall, they were the basis on which the Sustainable Development Goals started. And the first person who inspires low-key women, if I may call them that, is Jeffrey Sachs, with the small banks that he started. I think it's in Rohira, but all this resonates around the history of women inclusion. So if you have a moment, it may not be now, but this is something you may want to investigate.
I will. Thank you.
In your chapter 5, knowing that you have set the pace that this study is critical to analyzing and appreciating the current challenges that micro entrepreneurs have, I want us to think of chapter 5. That is your methodology chapter. While I thought it comes late in the thesis, and it's not clear why that happened.
I beg your pardon.
The chapter 5, that is the methodology. You remember I said I would have expected it to be chapter 3, but it's chapter 5. And I don't know why that happens, but that is, that's something to be thought about. I wanted to know, what is the difference between the parallel mixed design and mixed methods design? The design that you use.
I beg your pardon, Dr. Parallel mixed design, and
You use what you call a parallel mixed design. And I wanted to know how different it is from the mixed methods design, because when you try to plot it, they're exactly the same.
as you say, Doctor, it is more or less the same. But given that I examined the parallel, I read about the parallel mixed design, I don't know much about the mixed design.
The parallel, the mixed methods design is really that you mix your qualitative research and also do a survey. And you use that information, especially from, for example, the qualitative research, to reinforce your findings on the quantitative, because you also had a PSS and all this that you showed us. And when you look at what a parallel mixed design is, there's absolutely no difference. So perhaps, and unless it was just smart for us to use a different language here, I just see that what you did was mixed methods design, and for you to introduce parallel, and yet we don't see any comparison, I think I would recommend that we think about that. I also think that you have very impressive photos that you put in your work in this section, in this particular chapter, which I think should be either at the end, because they're illustrations, or somewhere maybe in your findings, because you want to make a case of them selling on the streets and you want to show us why are they in the methodology. Unless you're saying I only selected women from the streets, which again denies us that opportunity to engage with the third theory that you talked about. All these photos I recommend should be out and put in the respective sections. In chapter 6, with your presentation of the findings of the study, which I really still would have loved, and this is something that is the philosophy of methods. And I remember when Professor Ashe was presenting to us analysis of methods, there was that very key issue of how we present our findings. And when I read chapter 6 and chapter 7, I think they lived together and they should have been married. But for purposes of this, we shall remain that they are separate and we engage. And again, the first question that comes up when you read that chapter is the lack of difference between the micro-entrepreneurship versus entrepreneurship in the context in which you do the work. Maybe let's turn to mine is page 104. Sometimes I know that we have different versions, and I want us to look at table 6.1. You there? I think it's in some it's 1.2. Are you there?
Yes, yes.
Okay. In table 6.1, the total number of respondents, women micro-entrepreneurs that were interviewed, were 140. But your sample size was 134. Would you like to elaborate why that was the case?
Thank you, Doctor. And as much as I set out to investigate 131 women micro-entrepreneurs, along the way, I think it was an oversight. Maybe I got excited. But going forward, I'll address that next time. Thank you.
In the description of the area of study, and this is the first time, and I like this work because at least it helps me to know the difference in Kampala. I knew, and I grew up in Kampala, and I hear the names changing. And in your thesis, I'm able to tell the 4 parts: Kafumbe Mukasa, which had the biggest respondents. You had Nachivo Mills. You have the Market Street. Then you had Kisenyi. Although Kisenyi, I think, is behind Nachivo Mills in the reality of the geography. The question was, were others not responsive? Because when you say you targeted Kafumbe Mukasa, which had the biggest respondents, ideally, especially if you claim you did the quantitative, there has to be a justification why Kafumbe has the biggest. I know that you said you talked to the LCs, but everyone wants work done in their area. So I think you should have been careful to at least have a representation from the others. When you say it's the highest, it becomes a problem. Did you, again, in this work, you quote that 2 of my friends never went to school, but they use common sense and their experiences to manage their businesses. This part, members present, the scholar is discussing part of her findings and is placing a couple of variables of the respondents, and one of them is education. And here she says 2 of the friends of the interviewee, yes, they didn't go to school, but they were using common sense. And that, for me, is a finding, therefore, that reveals that participation in income generating activities is more common among women with basic education. Because if she says she uses common sense and she's able to sustain her business for the 3 years you studied, then that's not a small issue. I would have investigated what other components she calls common sense. Or perhaps maybe you want to tell us, since you're in the field, what was common sense? What did she regard as common sense?
Thank you, Doctor. Common sense in this study, in this case, refer to capacity to negotiate for the spaces, the capacity to be able to count the money that was, coming through, capacity to speak with customers. You mentioned that.
So you see how much you cheated us in not including that? Because these women have not gone to school, but they are using their ability to navigate, and they are using their common sense. That's why they're even able to change the streets, to mark the streets where business is and take advantage of them. I think you leave out that, and it would be very nice for you to represent it. And again, these women, you show their negotiation capacities, their way to obtain startup capital in terms of money and goods that they would later use. And I'm happy that now I'm seeing a slide that has what you're calling startup capital. In business today, and I think this is something we are learning, is that there's no way you make a business and grow if you don't use other people's money. And I think this is something that these women are doing, but you do not represent it. Perhaps you explained it here. If some of these women are innovative, which they were, they actually go and pick merchandise, come and sell, take back the profits, and rather keep the profits. Even these terms should be here, because this is our work. We are decolonizing language. Let's use the terms people are able to. So they go and get the product, sell, take back the money, and keep And I think for me, that is a very key source of capital. And because of that, we don't know what the startup capital is, but I like it later when you do the presentation, because you do highlight that it can be anything, anywhere from, is it 5,000 that you mentioned? Yeah, so I think that much later it comes out. The startup is one of the major indicators that defines, according to you, the survey population, as well as giving a glimpse into women's empowerment. Subsequently, it's imperative that the study delves further into this indicator and examines its distribution in comparison with other indicators. And I'm saying that perhaps you may want to explain the relationship between the startup capital and marital status, because to you, when you argue, I don't know whether it was a result of when women would make money, then they would run away from their husbands, because that becomes very key. Their marital status relationship with the startup capital and empowerment is explained, but the relationship is not very clear, very clear. Again, you talk about the marital status of respondents. In the table, you show 52, which is 31% of the survey respondents, were not staying with any partner. These were followed by those that indicated to be divorced, widowed, and those were 49, which is 35% out of the total number of respondents. So I'm curious to know, because when you come to do the definition, the explanation, how was this marital status, how did it determine participation in the micro-entrepreneurship? Are you arguing that because women were widowed, many of them were in micro-entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Doctor. I wouldn't draw a conclusion that because many women were single or more so widowed, the reason they were there, because that was not in the scope of my study, Doctor. I don't know.
Yeah, the whole argument for me is really to see, because these are very important variables and you make them so, but how do they inform entrepreneur or the micro-entrepreneurship? Especially, I'm thinking of, subsequently, you even talk about period spent in business. And you say the respondents were tasked to reveal how long they had spent operating in their respective locations. From this inquiry, it emerged that 47.9% of these respondents had spent not less than 3 years, yet 15 had spent from 2 to 3 years in the urban spaces. And the proportion of the other categories of respondents that had spent below 2 years was 37.2%. So I'm looking for the relationship of the period spent in business and how that either increases their micro-entrepreneurship businesses. What is in it? Why was the period they spent in business important in this particular discussion?
Doctor, I would only draw that conclusion when I do a cross-tabulation of the time spent in business and the bearing that it may have with the summation of the total capital, But going forward, I think that's an interesting
and it borrows again back from the methods you used, because you said you used observation. But if you look at your observation checklist, because that would have been very informative. If you look at your observation checklist, I don't remember what page it is. It's very narrow. It's only like 4 areas, and you can always go back and check. Because if someone is staying in business for long, and this is where I thought you should have even nailed it more. And you said there's this woman in Kaberamaido here in the explanation. That woman was able to build the house probably because she had worked longer and now knew the intricacies of the city and knew how to negotiate those barriers. I think that story needs to be here. I hear you say it in Kaberamaido, but I don't see that story captured. So that when you're discussing the period spent in business, it relates with the output of what these people are or have and where they are with respect to being in business. And that, again, brings me back to the terms that we use. I like the idea of calling women housemaids, but I want us to change and start using the word house managers. Because out of those women, sometimes when they leave being house managers, they go and do business. Okay? And I'm sure if you talked about Kafumbi, Mukasa Street, many of these women would have been brought by, depending on the research you carried out, the interviews, and they sometimes accumulate their money and go and set up those micro-entrepreneurship. So I want to see the relationship between the period spent in business and the advantages these women entrepreneurs go by, because subsequently you follow it up with access to space. And for me, I'm looking now for agency. The more money, the more they're able to assert their capacities and their agencies and locate themselves. So in your access to space, you're finding sure that there were barriers to accessing the streets where markets was readily available. I would like you to inform and help us to appreciate how this space was obtained, because at some point you mentioned they pay some formalization money. What was formalization money?
Thank you, Doctor. I mentioned a number of ways that the women were using to access. One of them being paying some bribe to the askaris, the guards who were guarding the respective shops. Others were just place items, just unprecedented in a way, very unprecedented way, on verandas, on streets, anywhere. When they sit an askari, I mean, KC officials, off they take off. They go to another place which is not well guarded, just like that. Yes, Doctor.
So I think that the negotiation of space, in you explaining it here, I understand it, but I would have loved to see more, because part of that space is a space that it was formatting space, a space of you call it apprenticeship, and you mentioned that. Perhaps what I would have loved to see more again in your space is how that space becomes also a strengthening factor for some of these women. And you mentioned it, but it would be better to also accompany it with some of the narratives, because you say that those women who lacked bargaining power were able to use other women to support them to open these spaces. And that is the group think process that you talked about, these women groups that were able to support each other. And again, some of these stories need to be here, because this is one of those books that is going to be sought for very highly, especially by policymakers, to understand how these groups function and how they can be utilized by policymakers to increase the women's capacity. The brutality that you mentioned is very key. Again, you simply say they do this, they run, they beat them. These stories need to be told. And I just remember vividly, and I think I've included those of you who recall how they took a woman and the baby was run over by a car. And the women marched and took the dead body to the parliament. These are powerful agency statements that I think I feel needed to be told in the work. So in that case, when you talk about these spaces, what is an authorization fee? Is that something that is official, or is it?
Thank you, Doctor. In the given authorization, sorry, thank you, Doctor. in the given circumstances, authorization fees means the little money that is paid to respective spaces, such as
Verandas, yes.
the money that you pay to the owner of the space near a street, the corridor of, that belong there. There is a way they designate the spaces, more especially the people who have been there quite some time. They tend to own the spaces. So the newcomers somehow compromise them by giving them, a little. That is the authorization money that I'm talking about.
And which speaks to the geography of the area. Can we see that explained here? I'm hearing it, but I was not sure what is authorization. It's not formal way of doing business, but it is a tacit agreement between the owner of the space and the newcomer, and that is okay. I think that needed to come out very, very strongly, because it kind of makes one happy to see that they reference the fact that they have a big brother or a big sister they rely on. And sometimes that authorization fee sometimes is not even paid. It's negotiated and someone doesn't make the business. It's okay, since you didn't sell anything, it's fine. That is what business is. That social capital among these women and how they are supporting each other needed to come out. I think we're about to wind up, but let's go to your chapter 7. And that's where I find that 2 chapters, and this is an agreement we can have from the higher levels of the professors. These are 2 chapters that need to go hand in hand, because the same issues that are raised in chapter 6 in the findings are also then in the discussion. So it creates a challenge. But as an historian, please forgive me on that. That's how we do it. But here in your chapter 7, is again the issues emerge. Page 140, you make an argument that the findings therefore reveal that women's participation in micro-income generating activities is more common among women with basic education. This signifies that education and training are crucial components in the success of entrepreneurs. So the education profile of participants combined with their financial training has been shown to greatly improve the women's knowledge of budgeting, management, and savings. However, with just basic literacy and numerical skills, most women face personal and institutional barriers to formal credit access, leaving them poor and deprived. Which women are we talking about here? Who is appealing and applying for formal credit access? Is it still our micro-entrepreneur?
Thank you, Doctor. In this case, I think I was quoting the literature. Yes, Doctor. And who may not necessarily be in this scope, because I gave 2 definitions. There's a definition by World Bank that looks at a micro-entrepreneur as that woman or a man who employs less than 10 people. But in this perspective, I was looking at a woman who employs less than 3. So the scope is different. Yes, Doctor.
Although you state it's the findings. Huh?
I think I was discussing, Doctor. Was that right?
It is the findings. That's why I'm curious. It's definitely a very important point. What I'm trying to say is, even in your women that you studied, there seem to be categories. I think we can't commonly refer to them as micro-entrepreneurs. There are some who had been even able to do a little better, because now they are even negotiating for, if possible, formal credit access, but because they are not as educated. And I think there's a lot of support given to them by banks, especially Centenary Bank, in that particular market and area. But perhaps that is something that was an oversight. I would like us to go to 7.2.2 areas of operation by micro-entrepreneurs. That for me was the highlight. I like how you describe the markets, the way the business was run. But I think there are some repeat statements that will need to be removed. For example, 7.2.2, the same exact paragraph is represented somewhere. Let's come to page 149, another argument, and that's decision making. For me, again, that was one of the highlights of your work. You say, in another development, the study findings showed that the majority, that is 80.9.3% of the women micro-entrepreneur respondents, made major decisions on matters pertaining to their family affairs. The major categories of items on which the respondents made major decisions included food and drinks, salt, among others, clothing and other wear, household requirements like soap, charcoal, among others. And I'm reading this and I'm wondering, doesn't this take us back to the patriarchal issues again? What do the professors say? Is this a change? Was it being done differently? Let me assume that the study happened now, which it did. Before that, weren't women making decisions on these things?
Doctor, thank you so much. Now, traditionally, the women were meant to be receptive. They were never meant to come out of the homes, to work and be able to provide. But due to the change that Kabi is talking about, she says empowerment is about change. Now, the fact that the women are coming out in the urban spaces to operate micro businesses, and we see them buying, making decisions pertaining the whole, household responsibilities. That is an aspect of empowerment that I was trying to bring out, an aspect of change, and the fact that they are able to do what they used not to do in the in the old days. Thank you.
I would stand to be. I would love to learn more about this change, but typically growing up in a household of female raised upbringing where they made all the decisions, I grew up knowing women make those decisions anyway. So I think you're depriving them of their, yes, they've always made these decisions. Yeah, so strengthen it. I like that in one of your barriers, you point out KCCA. And like I said, yes, more information should be given on that. And I'm glad that in your recommendations, you actually tie up a recommendation that says KCCA should. But the way you put it this morning, you said KCC should minimize its high-handedness. It shouldn't be there in the first place. It shouldn't be there in the first place. There's nothing like minimizing. Okay? That should be clearly stipulated, that if it's a recommendation, the KCCA should have guidelines that have to be followed, and that violence against women can and should never happen on any streets whatsoever. And as I think this being a gender document, I would make that a whole chapter showing the incidences. It should never. This business of forcing them, and again, another word that I would beg that we revise in our work, into prostitution. I don't think we should use that, because this is women at work. That should also, you see, you said they tell you all these things, Malaya, what? This is to demonize you and reduce you. So if that is a term that they use, do you want us to continue with that term? What other term should we? Because these are the innovations work has to do and appreciate. Yeah. And I think finally, another highlight of this work is 8.1.3, the acts of transgression, oppression, and sex for survival, which I have just referenced. That in this work, you discovered that these micro-entrepreneurs were victims of this discrimination and sexual harassment by both male counterparts and prospective customers who called them all these things that I have just used. And I don't want to repeat them. I grew up knowing you never repeat a bad word. Participants, thus express the desire to be treated like human beings in Kampala rather than victims on Kampala streets. This is an emotional state of empowerment that involves realization that women's relative lack of resources arises from discriminatory purposes, patriarchal tendencies, and rules which give priority access to men. And I think this is one of the most powerful statements. And I don't know, are we allowed to have epigraphs? That statement you put at the beginning of a chapter. We do that in books, but I think you can do that also in a dissertation. I think this is very, very fundamental in your work. It's an emotional state of empowerment. Empowerment is not how much money. It is that physique that someone walks out and feels they are who they are. And I think that for the micro entrepreneurs should have been very, very given high attention. Overall, when it comes to microfinance, and I'm happy that we have an expert on that, I was taught that if you want to make money, don't use your money. Don't use your money. Use other people's money to make money. And so I was curious to know, out of these returns on investment that you discuss in 8.1.4, the weak financial position of women, how that can be improved. Because even when you itemize the kind of products that they sell, for me, these products are very important and they are critical and they are a must-have, which means they can take advantage of that and expand their markets. And to this end, I would love to have seen women who own borders. That's not microfinance only or micro-entrepreneurship, and how they are using the borders to grow their business. Woman is selling matoke and you know her, she's your friend. She has a border, she puts the matoke, it finds you in your house. Huh? Isn't that an innovative way of microfinance, or rather micro-entrepreneurship? And it's on the increase. By the time you studied and wrote this, I think it was one of the Kafumbe Mukasa management areas now. Today, you don't have to be in your house to drive to Frieka. What do you call it? Pharmacy. You just have their WhatsApp, you call them, they process and they send. So the women in Kafumbe, these micro entrepreneurs have become innovative, and it would be nice if I could see that also included. So members, the rest of the issues are in the book, and for purposes of allowing an opportunity for others, I think the three biggest takeaways for me is that you are researching an area that is very prime, and there's a lot going on and a lot of advancement. And thank you for doing that and giving a voice to these micro entrepreneurs who we are all standing on them, but we don't realize that. So thank you for doing that. The issue that I think the three recommendations I would make is one, redefine space. Redefine space and redefine empowerment to include that social relations and emotional entrepreneurship, which rather empowerment, that is key. And the third, I would like you to pay attention to the methodology one more time and correct all those variances. I submit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charlotte. Nestor, are we still together?
Yes, we are.
You're still breathing. Now that is just one phase of the interview process. We still have another one. For me, my take from here, Dr. Charlotte, that I'm going to reflect on and maybe write about is my village is where the business is. I think for me that was very, very important. So you can see we are all beginning to learn and pick from this study, which means you hurry up and publish it when you finish before we do. But anyway, that's just phase one of the interview process. I think since we all came very early, we are going to stop for maybe 5-7 minutes. You step behind there, pick something to eat and drink and come back, because we have another set of examinations. The examiner, that whole panel, there is a panel of examiners on that side. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there are 7 people. They have questions for you. They have read your work. They would also love to engage with it. And beyond that, then we have the public, plus the many people who are online. I think they're around 48. So please be the first to pick something as you prepare for the long haul. Thank you, members. Just over to the back. We are going to take like maybe 10 minutes. Those who need a bathroom break, this is the time to have it. And we come back and discuss women space entrepreneurship. Thank you. Those who want to go to the bathroom and you're not familiar with this, Mr. Farouk is there to guide you. Good morning once more. We are soon coming to midday. So hope you've all picked a bite and a drink. The rest of us concluded that since we are neither the student nor the examiner, we should be allowed to take our tea at leisure. And since Nestor has told us that for her she's ready, and some internal examiners look like they have also finished their tea, I was suggesting that we proceed with the examination as the rest of us enjoy our tea and our drink. But be sure we shall be here listening to both, to the student and the examiner. It's only the mouth which is going to be occupied. Thank you. And after the examiners, we shall be taking questions from both in the room and outside. So please prepare your questions and you raise your hand at the right time. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, colleagues, and all protocols observed. Congratulations, Nestor, upon this milestone.
Thank you, Doctor.
I come from a business background, and this is a bit different from how we do our research. First of all, starting from your topic, urban micro-enterprises and empowerment of women in Kampala. Would love to see how the first of all, we look at how micro enterprises have empowered. So you have to show us in terms of empowerment. And this mostly is explained by looking at your conceptual model. Your conceptual model on page 37 is very, very I've not had you answer questions to it, to the model. Then it's not this one, Professor. There's the one that she has written on page 37 with all these different variables. So we'd like to know, for us, we want to know how you have used all those variables to explain the empowerment of a woman that you are looking at. So it is not stated in the presentation. The presentation was very, very brief, given the kind of, the quality of your work is very good, but you cheated us, like Professor said, of some of the good things of your work. I still also found a mismatch between your, you did not tell us the population of your study. Did you? It was not there?
Yes, I did.
It's the sample, but not the population. You stated a sample, but not a population. Okay? And for us, we are very, very particular on where you get the information from, because a sample must be a representative of the population that you are working with. So in the abstract, you actually looked at, you mentioned 90. That the sample was 90 women, micro-enterprise that participated in the survey. In Kampala, we all know that we have many, not so. So there is no reason why we should have only 90, because they're everywhere. And you said central division, central Kampala. We know there are quite a number of markets in the central division, including Nakasero market, which you did not mention for us here. Here, you only looked at Kafumbe Mukasa. I think the details are in that. So we'll want to know, maybe you also what's it called? You narrow down so that you are in maybe the southern part of Kampala Central, something like that. But when you say Kampala Central, there are quite a number of markets which you denote, and especially when you look at your sample size, it is very, very small for this population. We are looking at the informal sector. These women are very informal. That's why you find that they are not even registered. The people that you looked at, the women you looked at, I think over 99% are not registered. Sometimes the space that you're talking about, they're just renting or even paying. They don't even pay license. They only pay the person who is renting to them the space, and maybe what's it called? There's that small money the street market collects at the end of the day, but that was not specified. Then you talked about it would also be nice to separate the sectors. You are combining every woman, in every micro enterprise. So it would be nice in your analysis, which I did not see in the book, to show us in which sector were they in agriculture, because we saw those are in agriculture, others were sex workers, others were they were in transport. So tell us which category was in transport, which category was in the market itself, displaying tomatoes and onions, others were in manufactured goods, the knickers that you mentioned. So separate the sectors, and then it becomes easy to understand. Then you talked about the methodology that you used, a parallel method. You use parallel method, but then you combine them when it comes to the analysis. In business, we call it triangulation. We use the mixed method, but like what you've done in the book, that you've stated a quantitative statistic, and then you've backed it up with a qualitative analysis. But then when you are mentioning in your presentation, you said they were collected parallel and they were analyzed parallel. So where did they meet? You get it? We need to find out where these meet. Yeah, I think most of the issues, I think Professor hinted on them, but I think it has to do with the layout of the work, because when you look at the chapters, it would be nice before you it would be nice to first give us the context. You can separate, it is allowed to have a chapter of the context alone before you go to the literature review. But then again, you gave us the literature, you gave us the theoretical framework before the literature review. We know the theoretical framework comes from the literature review. So I don't know why, maybe it is how your area of study arranges that work, but that's how we really know. And so it will also be nice, like Professor mentioned, that all the theories that you identified, yes, we know when you use the translation of theories, one theory has a weakness which the other theory supports. So you have to mention this, that when we use the long way theory, it has this weakness. So this weakness was overcome by Cabell's theory. And then maybe the shortcoming of Cabell's theory was also supported by the other person's theory, so that you get the positives, but the negatives are supported by the other theory. So that's how you are able to use to triangulate your work. So I think that's from me. Thank you. What needs to be responded to? There are comments for you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah, for your insightful, comments. To begin with, the conceptual model and how I discuss it. That's a very good insight. I'm going to take a look again at the presentation and discussion, and I will strengthen it accordingly. As regards the study population, I think it was an insight to write 90.
So when you look at the abstract here, the second paragraph.
The abstract, I'll correct it.
Yeah.
Thank you for looking at it. Regarding, yes, the women sex workers, there is no micro-entrepreneur who went on the street to work as a sex worker. Rather, they sell their items, but the other element comes in as a way of looking for survival, just because the micro businesses are not enough to support their day-to-day, needs. Then design, I'm going to also to address it. Thank you so much. As well as the theories, even the structure of the work, I'll look at it critically. Thank you.
Morning. Good afternoon, I think. Have we got to the afternoon part of it? Okay. Thank you so much for this work. I enjoyed reading it. It's very detailed. So many nuances. I wanted to say one of the things I really liked about it was how you really brought out the aspect of how the women negotiate those about the skills. There were some specific skills you kept bringing up about how women negotiate urban spaces despite the restrictions from urban authorities. So their voices, the way they kept bringing that up, I found that to be very interesting, I must say. Just feedback. I don't want to repeat anything that anyone said. So definition, micro-entrepreneurship, you've already gotten that, so we're not going to go into that. I just wanted to give you feedback from the reading of your thesis. I think one thing I sort of would have had advice or maybe critique on is the way the flow of the thesis goes. And this starts from the theoretical framework. When I was reading about representation of space and perceived space under Lefebvre, that person, I couldn't differentiate between the two of them. I even went and thought about in the brackets where you put conceived, which would mean maybe to create, and then perceived, which means to become aware of or understand something. I thought that even going by their real definitions maybe would have helped me understand that difference, or maybe even some examples. But I found that the way it was explained in the book, representation of space and perceived space, was difficult for me to differentiate. And then when it came to the conceptual framework, someone said something about it. I found it difficult to understand the explanation and the diagram. The diagram above, which someone showed there, was talking about something to do with the relationship between urbanization and micro-entrepreneurship. Yet, when you go into the representation, you talk about so many things. You show very many things like institutions, conditions, households. And then when you follow it up with the explanation, it's saying something completely different. So for me, I thought that the diagram and that explanation should have followed and merged each other. Yes. And then selection of case studies, I'll not belabor that point because it's about, if you had your definition of micro-entrepreneurship had been clear, the case studies would have been good for us and easy for us to follow along. But because the definition, conceptual definition of micro-entrepreneurship was not there, apart from that beginning phrase, the case studies here become confusing because someone is saying, what am I reading here and how do I try to connect this because I don't have that definition? And then when we moved on and went to your findings, I'll agree with the opponent that the merging of the findings and discussion section would have created clarity and sort of a narrative of coherence. And without you merging them, sometimes it became difficult to follow. And I'm going to show you how, in my opinion. On page 111, I think that is in the findings, you introduced to us the aspect of commercial sex work of the micro-entrepreneurs. You talked about respondents alluding to commercial sexual work, unprotected sex work. You left that there. That was a brief reference to it. You didn't pick up on it anywhere else. So the expectation there when you introduce anything in your thesis is that you're going to follow it through in the discussion section. I didn't find that in the discussion section. And then again, when it came to the findings again, you talked about the influence, if any, of the membership to women groups in their business. Still in your findings, that is on page 130. You talked about women talking about the amount of savings, how they contribute to women groups and how they use those savings. You also brought it up again briefly on page 139 when you talked about information gathered from group leaders showed that young entrepreneurs lacked capital to invest into income generating opportunities. You dropped that there, not to be picked up again. So if these things had been merged, then that discussion, these two discussions, one on commercial sex work and the one of women groups would have been discussed to completion and extensively. Then still continuing on the women groups, now you bring it back in the discussion on page 149 and you say, women belonging to women groups and starting off by saving, stated that because they don't belong to any women groups, this does something and something and something. But the point here being, the picking up and dropping of points does not follow a certain chronological order, which would make your thesis even more interesting. And then one crucial aspect for me that I thought I would have wanted to see in the thesis, and I know you talk about this in areas of further research, but I think that was a missed opportunity, is the aspect of the KCCA enforcement. Why? You spend so much time in your findings telling us about the high-handedness from the KCCA enforcement officials who confiscate the traders' merchandise. Even in the discussion section, there's a part where you talk about KCCA brutality. However, this is from the women's perspective. In my opinion, what would have strengthened that part would have been like, which laws or regulations do these KCCA officials rely on to enforce these punitive measures against micro-entrepreneurs? What is the rationale for those laws and regulations? And I think an interview from the KCCA perspective on their view of micro-entrepreneurs, what guides what they do, what policy guides what they do, would have strengthened that aspect. And then moving on, there's a part where you talked about, you brought in masculinity spaces that opened up in northern Uganda after the war. I think this is on page 156, I think in the findings. You talked about the fact that there's a source that noted that masculinity spaces opened up in northern Uganda after the war. I found that confusing and not placed in this context because, as you know, war and conflict changes gender dynamics. And that is a different perspective from your discussion. And then we continue. And I think this is in the concluding chapter where you say that when vendors were able to participate in the city's democratic decision-making processes, they were able to assert their right to engage in economic activities. And my question there was, which democratic decision-making processes? Because I had not seen them before that. I felt like that was almost a new addition, and yet at a very late stage to your thesis. And then still, when we go back to still on the process of chronology and how your processes keep feeding into each other. When I was looking at the empowerment theory, Sarah Longway's levels of empowerment, what confused me in how you organized those ideas was how you kept jumping between Sarah Longway and Kabia's theory, meandering between the two of them and bringing in other authors. Sometimes it was difficult for me to draw a relationship between what did Sarah and Kabia say and what did the other authors say without relating them necessarily to the two authors that you're talking about. So it was just a matter of how that idea of theories was organized sometimes. To me, just felt like meandering between Sarah Kabe, and then going to other authors like Sen, Moza, Kent, Khan, throwing them in there. So I kept saying, so we're talking about Kabia and Sarah. Why are these other people coming into the equation? Especially if they cannot be directly connected to these two people. That was the question I had in my mind. And still under the theoretical framework, again, I felt like there was jumping from one issue to another, which I found confusing. I'm going to give an example. From between pages 20 to 22, you talked about urban space. Then in the next paragraph, jump to urban crime and violence. In the next paragraph, jump to poor housing conditions in Kampala. In the next paragraph, ways in which urbanization provides space for women's voice and action. And I kept saying, could we flow these ideas, even remove some of them? Because actually that theoretical framework was a bit long, in my opinion. So just that chronology and how you organize your ideas on paper would have really made this very outstanding. Still chapter 4, someone talked about structural adjustment programs, neoliberal policies. Professor Sarah is here. And the way you talked about them there, you were almost praising them. You were in support of them. Let me give you an example. You talked about, you said the government reform program and liberalization policies have led to improving infrastructure like schools, health facilities, improved access to education and health services. I found that quite confusing to put liberalization in the same WhatsApp group. Should we call it WhatsApp group? Or in the same argument with increasing access to social services. When we know that there's literature out there, very big forms of literature that talk about reduced investment in social facilities such as health, education, as a result of liberalization and structural adjustment policies, because there's a tendency to move towards profit maximization, further exacerbating that gendered poverty that you keep talking about. In fact, at the end of that chapter, you said the same thing. You seem to come back and agree that indeed some of these policies have led to reduced spending in the social sector. So again, we're talking about the flow of ideas, the chronology of ideas, how one idea fits into another, to avoid that kind of contradiction that I came across sometime. So with those few words, I think, a few comments, I'd like to thank you very much for a very outstanding thesis, which I think could actually be thought of in terms of publication and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Gavas. I'm happy that my book has gone through the hands of those really that know it all. And I know after today, I will not remain the same. Now, I also appreciate Dr. Gaba for the feedback and your report, which I received last month. And I must say firmly that much of it has been incorporated in the book. And the book, as you will see it, looks much better than it was submitted to you. I apologize for the errors. I think much of it is, yeah, that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And congratulations, Nestor, for reaching this stage. The verdict is not yet done, but reaching this stage is also important. Yes, I got us an opportunity to read your book. It is a rich study, as my colleagues have highlighted. And I just wanted you to tell us what is the added value of your study to gender studies field. What would we lose if you didn't do this study. Secondly, my concern is around the way you present the theoretical framework. I think Charlotte and Daphne have already mentioned that details, but the aspect that I would be interested in, you may not answer it now, but you need to reflect on, is linking Neila Kabir and Sarah's theory of empowerment with the spatial theory, because apparently the way you present them in your books, each of them seem to be standing alone. And at some point there is where you deal, where you focus so much on Sarah Rongwe than, you know, the other theories that you talk about to be informing your work. So it would be important for you to see how the empowerment theories linked to the spatial theory, how they connect with the three aspects of the spatial theory, the spatial practice, the conceived space and the lived space. What do these mean for the different aspects of empowerment? The other issue I have is around the methodology, and in particular, the difference between a research design and a research approach. My colleagues, Ruth and Mugisa, will agree with me that what you present, we teach together on the research methodology courses. What you present as a research design is actually not a research design, but a research approach. And so I would want to encourage you to explore more about the difference between the two, and in your book to highlight the correct research design. The other issue on the methodology that I found which was not clear is the criteria you use to select the study sites, which I think my colleague from COBAMS has highlighted a bit, but also the case studies. How did you select these case studies? You need to convince us, because you don't provide evidence to that. And more to that, you use names. And ethically, we know that using participants' names contradict the ethical considerations around confidentiality and privacy unless you sought consent to use their real names, which you do not mention in the methodology. And so would like to understand how this came about and whether you did get consent that you can use the real names, or the names that you attach to the different case studies are pseudonyms. The other aspect that I would want you to explain a bit more is on the analysis bit. You talk about using 3 levels of analysis: bivariate, univariate, bivariate, and multivariate. And I'm just wondering, what was the value of using the 3 levels? Why didn't you stop at bivariate or even univariate? Why did you go further to the level, to the 3rd level of multivariate analysis? And then also you talk about using a number of computer programs. I read about Starter, and I was wondering, why did you have to use all these computer programs to analyze your quantitative data in particular? What added value was there for you to especially use SPSS and then Starter? Because in my little knowledge, I know that those 2 programs address more or less, you know, similar aspects. So would want to understand what was, why did you have to use those many programs? Moving on to the presentation of your results. The chapter on results I felt was too long. Reading one chapter that is 57 pages and comprehending it sometimes is a little bit difficult. Maybe you had a reason why you had to to present all your findings in one chapter. And I know that the graduate school guidelines for PhD dissertations, you're expected to at least focus on one objective per chapter rather than lumping them into one. And so maybe you could explain to us what led you to take that kind of format or structure. The other issue is around the issue of women's empowerment and how you weaved it through your presentation of the findings and the interpretation that you made, especially for the quantitative data. I give an example. For example, on page 104, 62.1, you talk about the period that women spent in business. And that whole section is just a paragraph. What came to my mind and what I kept asking myself all through was the so what after presenting those tables was not quite clear, but in particular that section, what did this period spent in business mean for women as far as negotiating urban spaces and empowerment are concerned? Because this particular aspect is under the section of negotiating spaces. You could expound on that, but also reflect on the other subsections within that. How do the different aspects link to the aspect of empowerment, which is a key focus area for your study? I think with that, I will leave it. Most of the other issues I had have been already addressed. Over to you.
1 minute. Thank you, Professor. I really want to appreciate your time that you gave to the book and the rich comments that came. And I received them last. Quite a number of the comments have been incorporated in the book. For example, the idea of having a chapter on results, very long. I've tried to summarize it. I've left out what appeared to be repetitive, and now it looks better. As regards the discussion, it has also been strengthened, as well as the other subsections on empowerment, which come right at the end of the book. As regards the selection of case studies, I used purposive sampling, having got information from the local council leaders in those respective places, the 4 study areas. They told me that the women that I much, Nestor, for your presentation. It was very interesting listening to you and also interacting somewhat with your
thesis as well. But like I told you, the humanities are not really my strength, the theories. So now let me stick to the numbers. Nestor, you talk of these low-income women micro-entrepreneurs. What are their social demographic characteristics like? I would prefer I ask and you answer, and then that's how we do it. Yeah. I ask and then you, yes.
I beg your pardon.
These ladies that you engaged with, yeah, the women entrepreneurs, what are their social demographic characteristics like?
Thank
In
you.
summary.
Thank you, engineer, doctor. Well, some of them, I think the statistics were given, are married. There are those who are not married. There are those who are married but do not stay with the spouses. There are those that belong to the age group 25 and 40, and also a small section that belong to the group of 40 to 55.
Okay.
There are those who had basic education. There are those who had did not have any basic education. They're yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. When it comes to the methodology, yes, I see that for quantitative data collection, you used a questionnaire. How did you pre-test the questionnaire?
Regarding the pretest of the questionnaire, I went to one of the study areas, particularly Nakivubo Muse, which had, quite a number of micro-entrepreneurs, and selected just a few to start with. And the information that was obtained, the experiences that I gathered, I used that to approach other places, other study areas. Yes, Doctor.
And okay, it's not been very clear though the response. When it comes to the KCCA officials, these officers were in which? What were the names of their offices? The 4 KCCA officials.
The names?
Not their names, but the offices. Yeah,
quite a number of them did not have designated offices. They were, for example, in near Nakivubo Muse, there is a place called Kaja. I don't know whether some people have been there, Kaja. Now, after Kaja, there is in front of Kaja, there are some of those shops. The KCC occupy one of those shops at the extreme left. Then the others were surveying the streets from one corner to another. They did not have.
They don't have designations.
Majority of them did not have.
Their positions.
Oh,
how were they?
I did not really find out because I didn't find out honestly. But they had their uniforms, and that is how we could identify
those
them.
are the ones you engaged with.
Yes, and particularly those that were in the offices. I talked to some of them in that office. Yes, engineer.
And you, in your heart of hearts, you believe that the responses they gave you can be relied on?
Well, that was not enough because at the end of the day, it was not clearly, they were not giving me their all. So I took it upon myself to go to KCC office and somehow I established rapport with a lady there who gave me 3 more officials whom I interviewed and got information from.
And you acknowledge them in your thesis work? In your methodology, do you mention that that officer or whatever?
I don't remember.
Okay, Nestor, now you did some quantitative data analysis using SPSS, but you don't tell us which version of SPSS you used. Which version?
I used, I think 2007. I could be wrong.
please do some homework and
Sure.
make it very clear,
Sure.
because there's been modification over time, and of course older versions may not really be reliable in as far as data analysis is concerned.
Thank you, engineer.
But for your information, the most recent version is version 29. Yeah. But
I beg
please
your pardon,
find out,
29.
it's version 29, but please find out what you actually used. Yes. Now, when it comes to multiple regression, you did this, and I would be interested to know from your multiple regression, which model gave you the key independent variables, all those variables that you say, directly address what you were seeking to address when you did multiple linear regression. What were those variables? I didn't see that though in your presentation.
Thank you, engineer. I think that is a very classic question, and I'm going to read more about it. Thank you.
But did you do multiple linear regression? Yes or no?
Yes, I did.
You did, eh? Yes, but you need now to give us an answer to that, because I don't think I saw. Right? Now, Nestor, you tell us, let me finish with this. You tell us that among your recommendations to establish how urban micro-enterprises can exist in Kampala amidst existing regulations. And I think in your thesis work, you got some preliminaries on this. Can you bring some preliminaries on this so that you can now use that as a basis for making this recommendation?
Engineer, are you referring to the preliminary findings?
You made a recommendation.
Sure.
That there is need to establish how urban micro enterprises can exist in Kampala amidst existing regulations, right? And I thought that in your study, I think you got some insight, some preliminary insight on this, on how this can be possible. And I was saying to myself that, can't you write out these preliminary findings and then use them as a basis to make this recommendation?
Yes, engineer, I will do that.
You'll do that,
Yes, please.
Okay, then finally, I'm thinking that it would be nice for you to write a policy brief, especially when I had some earlier colleagues saying that the policy is very quiet on a couple of things when it comes to micro enterprises. So I think it would be very nice if you think of, write a policy brief and disseminate this, as your contribution to the women. Okay, thank you very much, Nestor.
You're welcome. Thank you, engineer.
Yes, thank you, Nestor, and the listeners. Next, I have one. The first question is that you mentioned that time was not sufficient. Are you requesting the panel or this team to give you more time so that you exhaust the study? The second is, what is your major conclusion? We have heard it all. What is your conclusion? You went out to the field with a purpose. What did you find out? In one sentence, the last, how do you, or how do your study results compare with existing knowledge?
Thank you, Dr. Mugisa. I will start with the last one, how the study results compare with existing pool of knowledge. My results, my study contributes to the existing knowledge, how micro-entrepreneurs empower women in the urban spaces of Kampala Central Division. regarding the major conclusion, I can say basing from the general objective we set out with how urban spaces and micro-entrepreneurship empower women, and the findings that I presented here, I can summarily say that micro-entrepreneurship in the urban spaces of Kampala Central Division empower women. Regarding the time not being enough, I can say the insights that came during the study gave me an impetus that if I had, another opportunity to do other studies, I would touch on several others, several other units. But given that the scope of my study was limited, I appreciate that the time I used was sufficient for this very study. Thank you.
Thank you, Nestor, for coming this far. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for your presentation, teaching us about what you found in Kampala. I'm very aware that you've already started addressing some of the comments from the examiners. So possibly some of the issues that I'm going to raise might have changed. I'll again reflect on what the independent reader talked to you about the history. You talk about Kampala being a patriarchal space. What does that mean? Possibly you could have defined what you mean by patriarchal space. If not, I think you need to define what you mean. And that also takes us back to the time that Charlotte talked about. Did we ever have a time when we didn't have women in towns? When did they start coming? And what explains the change that now comes in to interrupt the patriarchal space that you talk about? My second is a comment. I've looked at your methodology and my colleagues have already talked about it, the approach. You used the mixed methods research approach. And by that, it means that you had both qualitative and quantitative data. But by the nature of you using a mixed methods research approach, you need a point at which the two data sets speak to each other. I don't see you showing us where the two meet, and therefore I'm tempted to think that what you used wasn't a mixed methods approach, or else if you want to maintain it, then we need to see that integration, where it happened and what additional value it brought to your work. Secondly, why I'm tempted to think you didn't use a mixed methods approach is the kind of design that you choose. The case study is not part of the mixed methods approach. We have a line of them, some of them emergent, some of them parallel, some of them that are embedded. Therein are sets of research designs that you can use in a mixed methods research approach, which I didn't see. So maybe you need to reflect and say you used maybe a cross-sectional, but you collected both qualitative and quantitative data. You can work that out with your supervisors. The other comment that I want to make is in terms of the methods that you have given us for data collection. I think you have interchanged them. You talk about a questionnaire data collection method, then you talk about the survey as the tool. There is a mix there, which I think you need to correct if you have not already done that. Then section 5.52 and 5.5.3. I think these are very small and speak the same language. You are talking about key informant interviews as a method of data collection. You need to give us how many key informants you talked to, who were they, and these two sections can be brought together. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Rose. The issue of methodology, going to look at it more critically, and I'm sure it will be integrated. But having said that, The integration part of it in the study as it is looked at the questionnaire, the open-ended questions alongside the narratives, the qualitative narratives. That is how it was integrated side by side. Regarding the history, the patriarchal space and the women in town, clearly the cities were built by men and were made by men. That's a traditional baseline. What happens thereafter is a question that I'm going to address, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now time for the public. Farouk, how do I get to see the screen? I scroll to the chat. The chat is there. Okay, so Nestor, we are going to have questions from the chat. It starts from sometimes. So I think Nestor, you can start. Oh, she had already seen it. Okay, so members on the online, please feel free to raise your hand. I think it was a comment. Or is it something that you needed her to answer? It was a comment. Otherwise, he's Dr. Tibasima Isaac. So he asked a comment which we shall avail to you. There was a whole discussion when you were presenting in the chat. So it was that engagement which was going on. Yeah, so you'll get to see the people. Members online, you have the privilege since you didn't have our tea. Would you like to go first? Okay, so let me give these ones who are in the house. Professor Josephine Ahichire had her hand up.
Thank you. I'm a former Sokovireke. To the defense, Kati. This first defend. Nestor, thank you very much. And congratulations for reaching this far. I would like to ask just a simple question. What is your overall question for this study?
Do micro-entrepreneurs, does micro-entrepreneurship in Kampala Central Division empower women in that space?
That was all. Okay. Your triad model of space, where is gender in it?
Gender as a social construct does not appear here. That is why I presented that what is not known, going by the triad, is what the women occupy at the end of the day. That is the spatial tactics that the women are trying to investigate, to access. And I have shown in my presentation that they use the verandas, the pavements, along pathways, that is the missing link, the missing gap of the lacuna. Thank you.
I just have two small ones also. You talked about marriage, those who are married. What kind of marriage are you talking about?
Well, Doctor, I didn't go into the details of the marriage, but they were married.
As long as they said they are married. Why I'm asking this is that when we do research, especially feminist research, we need to interrogate and enrich our analysis and deepen it so that it's not superficial. Because some of these, when they asked You know, is there a difference between the married and those unmarried and how they negotiate space? That would have allowed you, if you had deepened your analysis, it would have allowed you to answer such a question. Did you engage with the concept of social capital?
Yes, I did, Doctor.
How?
I looked at the formalization of women groups, the fact that they are able to obtain goods on credit from, you know, the relevant, you know, more or less bigger micro enterprises.
Okay, but in the presentation you didn't seem to, because when you talked about Muno Mukabi operating at night, you know, I liked this one because KCCA officials at this time are on beer and shikarai, you know, busy being obese like me here. So you would have studied that. Lastly, on your conclusion and recommendations, I remember there's a time I was doing a study on vending in the city. I don't know whether you've seen that study. I would also have wanted to look at your references. Are you using local literature? But anyway, when you talk about the role of the state, the role of one person asked me, how do you research illegality? Because already this informal business within the KCCA Act and so on is illegal. So how do you just propose that it is formalized? You have to deal with the politics. How do you think that KCCA will formalize these rights? Just briefly.
Thank you, Doctor. Sorry, Professor. I will start with the local references which I use, such as Were et al. There's a Kikoma 2017, 2019. I've used Mayanja 2021 and several others. The last question is not, it is quite ambiguous that the state that is in charge of creating illegalities is the same state that is harassing women of the street. I think that gives me the impetus to come up with a policy, as engineer has proposed, to critically look at those two variables. And going forward, perhaps I will recommend accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. This one is a quick one. It's a public defense, so all questions are allowed. That's why we went public. When are you going to conduct such a study in a rural area? I would like to thank Nestor Basemera, my hopeful woman MP, Bunyangabu district. I would like to ask her, when will you conduct such a study in rural areas apart from Kampala, Central Uganda? It's a public.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, my friend Tadeo. I do a similar study. This is in a rural setting, okay? When the time and funds are...
Your mic and ask your question. Unmute yourself. Mr. Ivan Amoti. Send him a message to say it's time to ask. We can take one other question, anyone from the room, but immediately Mr. Amoti comes on, we shall allow him on.
No, not really. Something I pointed to Nestor about the new guidelines. Yeah. When you're writing, please at least consult the new guidelines to make sure that you comply as much as possible.
I will do that. Thank you, Engineer.
Amoti.
Thank you very much. I'd like to reach a word of appreciation to Basemera Nestor for the adequate presentation and research made. In fact, I've learned a lot. Thank you very much. My concern is one. I would like just to ask you, Basemera, Nestor, on the presentation she has made. We have seen a lot in women in this country, whereby there is a lot of negligence. Men are neglecting women. If you see most areas, the market is full of women. They are hustling for their children. They are hustling for school fees. I don't know how Nestor is she going to help? What can we do as a country to see that men are engaged in their responsibilities? When you see a number of women now, they are taking part of responsibilities in their home. Otherwise, I congratulate her for reaching this stage. Indeed, this presentation is wow, and I thank her very much. Keep it up. Basemera, Nestor.
And Navasaji says, Chogereko, talk about it. Answer the question.
Thank
We
you so
like
much.
animals as if men are dead.
Thank you so much, Amote Ivan. He talks about men abandoning their roles of providing for homes and leaving it to the women who are seen all over in markets, abandoning the way I've presented here. I think this goes a long way to sensitizing the mass and reechoing our voices. It is not a one woman's journey, it's a journey of everyone. So everyone's responsibility to re-echo these voices wherever we are, so we can create an equal world where everyone else, man and woman, taking of our own responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought you were going to take us into the engagement that the former principal used to talk about, collapsing masculinities, women are right. And in your Bible study with men, please remind them we are hustling like animals as if men are dead. You're not dead. Why are women hustling? And there were very many pictures that Nestor started with of women on the streets and we didn't see many men there. So I think I will write a book on Saji has said. Okay, members in the house, Dr. Ivan Isaac Tivasima Amoti.
I'll tell the dean you don't say Mr. Amoti though, and you don't also say Dr. Amoti. Nestor, thanks for this. Two things. One, you talk of negotiation. You don't define negotiation. And I ask because when you talk of negotiation, you're talking of power play. And again, when you talk of negotiation in your work, I see the word agency, which also invokes power. And agency, in one way or another, kind of brings empowerment, in one way or another. And because of that, in my thinking, and I could be wrong, you could help me think about it, agency and negotiation can turn out to be political concepts. I would be interested in knowing how these words are used in your study. The second thing is, in your first objective, you talked about access, negotiation, and the use of urban spaces. I do not know that you see a problem with that objective, because when you talk of access and then you're talking of negotiation, you're already making me rethink how you're thinking of access and negotiation, because negotiation is what leads to access. If, for example, women are not going to parliament, there is a negotiation process that takes place, which is a power performance many times, and then the women can access that. And you see now, like we are being told men are dead. The former principal said we are late while we are alive. There is, that's also an aspect of access. Are the men able to access those spaces? But also, you know that men, men can access both the private and the public. Men can access what we call female spaces. Females sometimes, and actually many times, are blocked from accessing male spaces. And so when you tell me about access and negotiation, I'm thinking, how are you thinking about these things? Because I'm also careful with the idea of urban spaces. And the reason is a market's urban spaces. How are you in your work defining spatiality? Because space is not just something we occupy. Space is a more deeply embedded ideological concept. And I don't know whether you deal with that. And if you don't deal with it, well, that's okay. But for me, the moment you talk of space and spatiality, you are invoking a discussion and debate on power. And I do not know, and probably the principal also asked you about this, I do not know where the gender element then comes into your work, because that is going to bring in a lot of things about negotiation, about access, about control, about who does what and who doesn't do what and who has the ability to do what and so much more. And I think for me, that process can turn out to be a very interesting item for study. And I don't know that you do that in your work because I've not read it anyway. My simple thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, so you want to make a comment? What you're
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Tibasing. It's very hard to answer a literature person. And you can see it's taking us into semantics, which I'm not an authority, you know, but in my own definition of the space, the urban space, it is that area, that where activities are cushioned. It is as plain as that. I will not go into your semantics because I'm not a literature person. Going to looking at access and negotiation, spatiality, there you go. Personally, I looked at access, and to me, access is about the women's presence in the urban area, especially in Kampala, in this case, Kampala Central Division. It is their presence there. What are some of those parameters? You know, I must say the ways through which they access. That is how we looked at it. And also negotiation of the urban spaces. It is about how they were trading their items from one corner of the street to another, from one road, from one shop veranda to another. That is, to me, and that was defined very well in the concept. I thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope Samsung you met, she has a zeal of learning new things from superiors. Otherwise, they are thanking you for the wonderful presentation and the confidence. And I imagine the zeal of learning from your superiors. So members, I think we've come to the end of the public engagement with the candidate, and that's the questioning. Right now, the committee is going to retreat. Thank you, members online and in the house, for your patience. We are back, hopefully with white smoke. Madam Nestor, what do you expect? What you expect is what we shall give you. Okay, so as you have expected, and I imagine as you prayed, you have passed. According to the panel, through this process, you have gotten 68%, which is above the pass mark. The verdict is minor corrections are required, and it means the thesis is being accepted with minor modifications. But there are specific areas for improvement, and there are many. Some of them you've already seen from your external and internal reviewers. But others from this process include the theoretical framework, which you need to revise. The other issue is the clear categorization of your sample. If you say you went to KCCA, we want to know who exactly did you go to, because that helps us also to make sense of the reaction, the responses they gave you. So classification of the respondents will be key with a clear focus on who they were
and the protocol, for example, of KCCA. In KCCA, there's a way you approach people. The social demographics, please engage with all the variables and how they influenced negotiation with space and entrepreneurship. There has to be a coherence between findings and the discussions chapter. Although we observed that actually for a PhD, this work should have been more thematic, as opposed to having a chapter of discussion and a chapter of findings. Rather, the issue could have been, what are the themes? You've gone to the field. Is it contested negotiation of power? Is it collapsing masculinities? Is it empowerment of women? So you deal with the findings there concurrently with the discussion, and also concurrently with triangulation, the way Dr. Sarah Bimbona said, okay? So that's going to be important. So separate the findings into themes, merge chapter 6 and 7. I know there were comments on how to triangulate qualitative and quantitative data, and to really strengthen the gender side of this dissertation, because you're getting a PhD in gender studies, okay? So it is important that it is well grounded in gender. So that is what we have. The supervision of your corrections is going to be conducted by Dr. Omolo and Professor Mhanguzi. Ideally, the university would give you 3 months, but I also know that the graduation lists are being discussed on Friday. So if we give you 3 months, you'll graduate in 2027. So if you really want to make the quick list, please look for the 2 people there in the room, make appointments and begin now, okay? Otherwise, from my side and from the side of the panel, congratulations. You have passed this stage, and we are going to recommend that you qualify to be given a PhD in gender studies with minor corrections. Okay?